Good morning. I'm Julio Saenz along with Mauricio Riveros. Today we have a special show. We have a conversation with each other and learn about our experiences as entrepreneurs.
We hope you will be inspired.
Celebrating leaders in Rochester's unique and vibrant business community. We'll meet entrepreneurs whose passion and perseverance have helped push through life's challenges. Join us as we share their stories and journeys to success. It's time to be inspired.
Julio, today we have a special show. Will be different. As everybody knows, Be Inspired, a show that was created to interview entrepreneurs, people who are starting business, developing business, managing large business. And today is a special day because we talk with Julio to do something different, to actually have an interview that I will be interviewing Julio, he will be interviewing me. And I think that's a really cool thing. We have done probably 4 years ago in the radio station. And now we want to learn more a little bit about Julio. So Julio, tell us a little bit about your story. Tell us about who is Julio Saenz.
Sure. Thank you, Mauricio. It's good. Yeah, I think it's good for folks to learn a little bit about us since we host the show every week in our business background. So myself, I was born in Rochester, lived in Costa Rica for a little bit and came back to Rochester and always had an entrepreneurial spirit. I used to actually, in 7th grade, I used to design t-shirts and sell them. And later on in 9th grade, my dad was in the Army and I would buy candy at a discount at the Army base and then sell it to my friends. So always just love the idea of, yeah, I think once you make your own money and you have control of that, I mean, that sensation never goes away. So always did that. And then a number of years ago, I actually started in the doing websites for people. Back when there were just a few people who knew how to build websites. I'm talking like mid-90s, I was already building websites for folks. And that was a pretty good business for a while because a lot of people needed websites and only a few people know how to make them. And then from there, eventually, I actually started Conexión, which was one of those moments, I think, and as an entrepreneur, I mean, the best thing you can do is always have your eyes open for a problem and how you could solve it, or, you know, a need that people have. Sometimes it's a need that you have and the other people have the same thing. And in Rochester at the time, the existing Latino newspaper, the newspaper that covered the Hispanic community, they didn't even go out of business. I believe the person just moved out of town. And so ceased operation, but it had been successful. And so I had studied journalism. I knew how to design publications. I had the web design background as well and the writing experience. And so I just decided I can do this. And I think over the years, that's a question I ask a lot of our guests. Like, well, what moment did that light come on and say, you know what, I can do this? And that's when it all came together for me on that project. I was like, yeah. And then I started working with one of my friends on it. I wanted somebody that I could trust. So I brought in a good friend of mine, Miguel Velasquez, and then a couple of other friends to help. And we took off and we were profitable from the first edition. In the black, and we had a lot of support right from the beginning. I put a lot of money and time into making it look really good. One of my favorite sayings is people don't give you money if you look like you need it. And so publication, I used the best paper, full color as much as I could. And so, yeah, did very well. And about about a year and a half into it, the Democrat and Chronicle approached me about buying it. And so it was doing very well, but obviously the idea of having the resources of the DNC behind us to take it to the next level was incredibly appealing, because in the end, I did it as a passion. You know, we talk a lot about passion with gas. And so that was my passion, was making sure the community had the information it needed. And so the idea of selling it to Gannett was great for many reasons. You know, one was that. Two, I planned on having more businesses in the future and being able to say, my last business, I sold it to a Fortune 500 company. That's going to be a pretty good way to start any conversation on future, businesses in the future. So for many reasons, I said, I said yes. And so I was able to work for them. Another lesson that I learned at that point was luckily to not really get into too many contracts and agreements. You never know who's going to want to buy your business. You also have to think about that. Your business that you're envisioning right now, that little idea that you have, and I ran that newspaper out of my basement. There's other people who may want to buy it. And luckily, we didn't have a lot of, outstanding agreements and contracts. So it made it very simple for us to do that. And then I went to work for Gannett for a number of years. And then from there, got recruited to run one of the Spanish newspapers in LA, which was a great experience. Loved living on the West Coast. Always thinking strategically, I actually took that job with the idea that I eventually wanted to run a national news media outlet. And so giving me that West Coast experience, I went to school in Miami and worked at a TV station in Miami. So I had the background in that market. Now I had the experience on the West Coast, and then in the Northeast. I figured that's going to give me the last piece I need to get a national position. And so after LA, I eventually went to Atlanta to run a bunch of magazines and newspapers for Cox Communications, which is a big media company. They own Trader, they own Valpak, they own newspapers, they own the Atlanta Journal-Constitution, they own a bunch of TV stations and radio stations. And I ran their Hispanic products, including a website called Mundo Hispanico, which at the time was just, only had maybe 130,000 page views a month. So very, very small traffic. And I basically took that nationally and got it up to the point where we were at around 30 to 40 million page views a month. So it became one of the most popular, most visited website by, in the Hispanic market in the United States. So, and then, I've had some businesses that didn't work. In between LA and Atlanta, I actually tried to launch a newswire, like an Associated Press for the Hispanic market. And I had a few customers, but I could never get enough, because by then the newspaper industry was really starting to suffer, which is why I decided to just get out of news, the newspaper portion, and I still read the newspaper, but, it was just really hard to try to grow things. Some of these large corporations were going through so many changes. So, and that's when I came to Rochester to start Poder 97.1 with Ibero. And, the rest is history. And then we started the show on Poder 97.1. We were the first, one of the first shows on there. And then Channel 8 was great, gracious enough to reach out to us to move the show over also to the TV station. And that's how I got here. And, a lot of great mentors, along the way, a lot of lessons, a lot of failures. That's a lot of the bright side. There was obviously a lot of difficulties along the way too, as anyone needs to experience and expect.
Yeah, and I think that is powerful because, Julio, in 50 years from now, that will be that reference that, people will use. And I think, I always said, when you want to write about history, you need to start now, and you need to put something, even if in your company, if the company continues in 100 years, our company will be celebrating in 2023, 150 years. Mm-hmm. And it's really cool to see the history of the company and the evolution of the company. And I think that's very important when people are willing to write, and you are an example of that in the community. Now, let's talk about your mentors, people who have influence in your life significantly, if you can mention some of them and how they impact in your life.
Sure. So I would say there's a couple of really important ones. I would say, first of all, you have to start with your parents, right? I mean, so my mother was a great mentor, very community minded, very positive. My mother always had very positive advice, very positive ways of motivating. It was never don't do that. It was more like, if you do this, then have these other opportunities. If you do that, then this will open up for you. It was never, you should, you have to do this. So I think that started to create, even at a young age, a very much opportunity minded way of thinking, and then, just that work ethic that you get from your parents. I'm sure with you, it's similar, this work ethic to do things the right way. But beyond that, I would say that once I got into the business world, I think the lights really came on when I worked at the Housing Council, and I had my executive director was Ann Peterson. She was just, I learned so much from her. I was 27. It was maybe my second real job. And I was doing community relations and running a bunch of programs. And she just really believed in me. And I think every one of us, hopefully at one point in our lives, has a boss that really believes in you. I remember a few years ago, I was seeing a speaker say that, your bosses are like a bell curve. The bosses, you have like a bell curve. You have a bunch in the middle that are cool. They're not out to get you, but they're not going to do too much for you. There's some at the other end that are just toxic. They really damage your career. And then every once in a while you have some at the other end that are just people who are really going to believe in you. They're going to see your potential, and they're going to try to mentor you, and they're going to jump your career forward years, light years. And so that's what she was for me. Just wonderful advice, believed in my talent, maybe, the talent that I had in myself, believed in my abilities, and gave me more responsibility, and let me run with it. And I just took off as far as my skills, my production, just everything. And you start to believe so much in yourself as a problem solver. I can solve these problems. And then a lot of just great advice. I mean, she's the one that used to tell me people don't give you money if you look like you need it. And I'll never forget that. It's one of the most influential pieces of advice I ever got, because I just, and that doesn't mean that you have to spend millions of dollars on things. It's just people want to be part of things that are successful. If you want to get people on board with your idea, make sure it looks polished, make sure it looks clean, make sure your speech, your elevator speech on your business idea is clean and concise and clear. People will get behind that. And once again, it doesn't mean you have to go crazy. It doesn't mean you have to buy Armani suits, but iron shirt, show up ready for things. Make sure you get, invest in the things that people will first see, so that they believe in what you're doing. And people, like I said, people want to be part of things that are going to be successful. If I believe you're going to take off and your business is going to take off, I want to be your customer. If I think you're going to be out of business in months, I'm not going to give you my business. So that definitely one of the most important, influential people in my life.
Thank you, Julio. We'll be back with more after these messages. It's interesting. You have been also a little bit in the music world, and music has changed so much, and society has changed, being in the radio and at some point DJ and music. And so what's your, how you see the transition, the audience, radio stations, people watching TV today, YouTube, social media is changing completely. Technology is changing how people even, I remember the vinyl discos, what we call the discos in Spanish, and, listening those things and have the classics and all that. And I'm sure you have your classics there. But what's that evolution? Explain a little bit, because you have a lot of richness around that.
Yeah, it's really interesting the way that media consumption has changed drastically. And we're not even done, and I'm glad that, Channel 8 is so progressive with having all our episodes online and everything else, because that's really what people want, is they want to watch stuff when they want, and they want to listen to stuff when they want. And so there's this balance between folks just, doing that a la carte, on demand, being able to, go to RochesterFirst.com and watch the news, watch the show. And then the people who still make appointments to watch the news at 6. I like to see the news at 6. It reminds me of, I've been doing it my whole life. I still like watching CBS This Morning on Sunday mornings. That's a great news show. But a lot of folks, that's what they're used to. And the new generation, that's all they do. I didn't mention, but I'm also a professor at RIT in the School of Communication. I do informal surveys of my students every semester, and it's just amazing that very few of them watch any live TV. Out of 30 students, maybe 2, and most of that is usually they'll watch some sports. So sports is one of the things that still does keep people tuning in, at least in that generation. But and they have a few of their shows that they really like. But that's changed the way they listen to a lot of things and watch TV. Now with radio, I think the advantage we have is that people are still in their cars. And though people do listen to podcasts, a lot of people don't want to think all the time because we still want to be introduced to new things. The same reason people still watch TV, maybe not at the scale of 20 years ago, but they still watch it because they want to be introduced to new things. It's when they learn something and then they hear their brand new favorite song. Everybody heard this but somewhere first, then it became their favorite song, right? So how do you still discover things? And that's why, media still has its place for sure, but it's changed a lot.
Yeah, it's a transition and it's significant. But I think it's also really the democratization, if you want to call that terminology, of access to information and the capacity to broadcast, even if you don't have a significant platform, and be able to have creativity and innovation is very now popular YouTube channels and be able to really outreach a significant amount of people in instance. So I think that's the transition. And now, Julio, what's your perspective of future in Rochester? You have seen so many things, so many changes in Rochester. We are hopefully getting out of this COVID. Mm-hmm. So what's your perspective of where Rochester is going in terms of economic development in this region?
So I believe a lot in the Rochester economy. I am a big supporter of Rochester, but I think I can separate the two to say that I do feel that Rochester is very well. It's done very well over the last few years up until COVID. And even COVID, we see the economy is booming coming out of this. I was just reading an article in the Wall Street Journal was talking about that this is really, what brought this recession and wasn't an economic disaster. It was a natural disaster. Classifying what we've experienced the last year is really something. And so you don't have the disruptions that you normally would have had to the economy. The economy is just sort of in hibernation. And now things are coming out of it, that pent up demand, a lot of people who saved like we've never seen before as far as savings being so high since it's been tracked in the early 80s, the highest it's ever been. And so people have all this pent up demand, and that's why we see it in the housing market and everything else. And it's amazing. I never thought I'd see the housing market that we have in Rochester. Having lived in LA, Atlanta, Miami, yeah, those things you see there come and go, but we've never had that here. And a lot of it is driven just by pent up demand. It's not like the bubble in 2009. I actually lived in LA when the housing bubble burst. That's a very different housing market than what we have here. So I'm very optimistic about the future of Rochester. I think once you also factor in the fact that we have all these great universities here, that this is a knowledge-based economy, which is what is basically the driver of economic growth these days. And I think we're in a great position. I'm blown away every time we have folks on the show and we learn about some brand new niche business that is here in Rochester. And, the way that came out of not just the universities, but all the talent that the large corporations that we have had and have here, the people that come out of those places is just amazing.
More than 5 years in Be Inspired, a show that we developed together. I remember dreaming in the beginning, hey, we want to really give good news. We believe that it's possible. We believe that people who are entrepreneurs can start a business and figure it out and live their passion. And we have interviewed literally now probably more than 100, 200, I don't know how many people. And has been a significant impact in our lives in building relationships also and seeing how incredible people can be when they have initiatives. If you can highlight some of the most interesting things that you saw during the show, just some of them. There are so many.
It's hard to pick, but I will say that, a couple of the ones that come to mind really quickly are sometimes it's hard to just remember all the details because I counted one day, it's well over 200. It's a lot of people. But you remember, some of the stories and and I always tell my communication students, people remember stories, not the facts. So you remember the stories. So, I remember, for example,
Tatiana was
Tatiana Vergara, who has the Pura Vida restaurant in Gates and Pura Vidaville. And I think we were both in tears hearing her story, how she used to pick cabbages in Brockport and was just so determined to start her own business and everything she's gone through to make it a success. And that's just the American dream right there. And it's just something you never forget. And it's something that motivates me. Those kind of stories when I'm thinking, like, I'm having a rough day, I'm tired. I'm like, no, I've never had to pick cabbages. Okay, I think I can do this. I can make it through whatever it is I'm doing today. So that's absolutely one that I'll absolutely never forget. You know, and then just people that found opportunity where, you know, there wasn't, you know, and says, you know, I'm going to start a restaurant, Costa Rican food. There's not many Costa Ricans here, but you know what? It's good and people are going to like it. I'm going to treat my customers well.
Has been a beautiful journey and continue to be, and hopefully will continue the next 5 years to go. Really building that spirit of entrepreneurship that I think is what built the economies in the nation. That small, medium-sized entrepreneurs who are taking the risk and living their dreams and working and creating jobs. And the best way how we can fight poverty is if we create jobs, if we allow the private sector to invest and to grow. And I think that is something significant, and we believe that in the show.
Coming up next week on Be Inspired, we'll meet Chris Bolaños, owner of C&B Repairs, and hear about his passion for keeping customers happy.
To watch today's episode and the complete interviews of our guests, go to rochesterfirst.com/beinspired. For more great talk with Rochester's entrepreneurs, listen to Bodette 97.1 Saturdays at 9 a.m. For Mauricio Riveros, I'm Julio Saenz. We'll see you next week on Be Inspired.